I move that they be recognized.
There being no objection to the motion of the majority floor leader,
Oh, Chairman, sorry.
yeah, do
He
I
is still the chairman, Mr.
of the basic
I
education.
was thinking of energy, Mr. Chairman. I still,
Okay, there being no objection to the motion
Yes,
of the
Mr.
majority
President,
floor
sorry.
leader to take up the budget of the Department of Education and to recognize the sponsor, Senator Pia Cayetano, to sponsor the measure and to interpolate Senator Wing Gatchalian.
Thank you. Mr. President, if I may please take the floor first. Mr. President, I'm ready to sponsor the budget of the Department of Education, Office of the Secretary, with total new appropriations of 676,245,962,000 pesos. Early Childhood Care and Development Council with total new appropriations of 291,798,000 pesos. National Academy of Sports with total new appropriation of 356,776,000 pesos. National Book Development Board with a total new appropriation of 121,828,000 pesos. National Council for Children's Television with a total new appropriation of 74,570,000. National Museum of the Philippines with total new appropriation of 944,407,000 pesos, and Philippine High School for the Arts with a total new appropriation of 107,171,000 pesos. As I have mentioned in my co-sponsorship speech, over the years, this is my fourth year in handling the DepEd and its attached agencies budget. It has been our goal to aim for a future-proof budget that is also sustainable, taking into account the concept of intergenerational fairness, preparing the future generation. I thank the Chair, Senator Angara, for his full support on these efforts. We are ready. The Vice President, Secretary of DepEd, Sara Duterte, is here, along with her USECs and other officers who can help this representation respond to the questions of our colleagues. It is 2:36. I will mention the time again when we are done.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, from the onset, let me thank the good sponsor, gentle lady from Taguig, for accepting our recommendations to the DepEd budget. We recommended 12 items to augment and to improve on the DepEd budget. Out of the 12, 8 were accepted. Some of them are the 4 that were not accepted. Some of them are admittedly quite hefty in terms of budget allocation. So this representation is willing to work with the good sponsor to look for sources of funds in order to fulfill those 4 items that I will discuss later on.
Mr. President, if I may just give a quick response, in as much as I support, usually the chairman of basic education and I are always, most of the time, are very much aligned. May I direct the attention of the good senator from Valenzuela to the person to his 5 o'clock. Yan ho ang tumatanggap ng mga amendments natin at tumatanggi. Pero as I said, we have naman din po his full support. Pero idaan nyo yung tingin niya dun sa 5 o'clock nyo bago kayo pumunta sa 6 o'clock.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So I also thank the Chairman of the Finance Committee for also accepting our recommendations. I know that some of the recommendations are quite big in terms of value, and it's quite a challenge to shuffle around budget to look for sources of fund. And admittedly, it's even a challenge to this representation to find sources of funds. But as much as possible, in our recommendations, we also suggest some sources of funds, and those other 4 recommendations that were not accepted will try to improve our recommendation as to where we can source funding for those. So again, thank you very much to the good sponsor and also to the chair of our Finance Committee. With that, Mr. President, I would like to also emphasize and manifest that the total allocation for the budget for the education sector is now pushing to 3.9% of GDP, 0.1% shy of the global recommendation of 4% to 6%. So we're now aligning to global standards. Konti na lang ho, we'll be aligned with global standards. And I thank, again, the good sponsor and the chairman of the Finance Committee for prioritizing education. Education is the key to drive our economic growth. And it's been an aspiration for a very long time to hit that 4% mark. And so we're just 1.1% shy of
Yes.
hitting that global standard.
Mr. President, may I also put on record, as early as last year, the senator from Valenzuela will recall, we also had this very same discussion na malapit na tayo dun sa minimum requirement.
Yes.
Pwede naman dagdagan, ano? Yun naman ang gusto natin. And the second point I want to raise that we had also discussed that what we now need to focus on is quality. Diba? Kasi the funding is there. We have always gotten the support, most of the support, if not all. So, quality naman ang kailangan bigyan ng pansin. Hindi ho ba?
Yes, definitely, Mr. President. And over the past few years, we've built a lot of the minimum requirements for education, such as classroom, hired more teachers, and definitely the challenge right now is to improve quality and to improve learner outcomes. And that it's really the ultimate mandate for the next few years. So,
And sorry, one last thing, Mr. President. I feel it's important to mention because this goes on record, no? If I recall correctly, no less than our chairman of the Committee on Finance had also pointed out last year, and I'll bring it up now, that there's also spending that may not be reflected in this budget, like the spending of the local governments.
Yeah.
Both the gentleman from Valenzuela and I come from cities that spend a lot on education. So if we were to include all of that, at least ma-report naman natin sa buong mundo, tingin ko naman nandun na tayo sa 4% or more if we include those spendings, Your Honor.
That's absolutely correct, Mr. President. What's not recorded in this measure is the Special Education Fund. And a lot of our cities as well as LGUs not only have their own Special Education Fund, but they also borrow to boost education spending at the local level. In fact, in Valenzuela, we almost double our special education fund by borrowing.
Yes.
And that's an item that we haven't captured in the last few years. So hopefully, with the special education fund and with other spending of our local government, baka the 4% is actually a reality.
Yes.
So with that, Mr. President, having said that, Mr. President, since I'd like to commend, of course, DepEd with under the leadership of our Vice President for successfully opening up our schools. And Senator Pia and I are staunch advocate of going back to face-to-face classes ever since. No? And I commend the department for successfully returning to face-to-face classes.
Yes.
Initially, through a voluntary basis, but after November it became mandatory, and from October to now, I would say that the recorded cases of COVID in our school is very low,
Yes,
very
Mr. President.
manageable, and I think what enabled that is the trial period last year, and a lot of our schools actually learned a lot from the trial period or from that period and enabled them to respond quickly. So that's an activity that we have to mention, and like again, I commend DepEd for successfully bringing our kids back to school.
I must interrupt you and join you in commending the Secretary, our Vice President, and the team for being very firm on this. We've come a long way just because of this firm policy. And I'm sorry to add this, but unlike higher education, which we will deal with later.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having said that, Mr. President, I know that we still have a lot of inputs that we need to resolve. No? it's no perfect picture with basic education, and with the country growing at around 6 to 7% in terms of our economic growth, and then our student population is growing around 4 to 5%. Definitely, fulfilling the inputs or the basic requirements is a challenge. And one of the things that I want to put on record, because we need to discuss this in order for our colleagues and our for future reference, and in order for us to have a target to hopefully to one day successfully fulfill this, is the requirement for classrooms, Mr. President. And I know that the amount is staggering. We've run some figures on the requirement to fulfill our requirements for classroom. But again, it's good to put this on record so that every budget deliberation, we will bear this in mind, and we will take into consideration the classroom requirements of our learners. So my first question, Mr. President, is to date, how big is our classroom shortage nationwide? And I also want to know and to inquire the amount that we need in order to fulfill the current classroom shortage and current classroom requirements, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the classroom shortage per the latest computation is 167,901 classrooms. This is based on the National School Building Inventory NSBI of 2019 for school year 2019 to 2022.
Okay. And then how much do we need, Mr. President, to fulfill all of those
Okay.
classrooms?
As I pick up those figures, Your Honor, let me just point out, because we may have viewers who will recall that the figure we put out during the hearings was different. It was 91,156 classrooms, but they had told us at that time that they were still updating
Yeah.
that. So that's why this figure is now 167,000, Your Honor. The ideal budget required to, sorry. His Honor will recall that during the hearing, I presented scenarios to fill in to address the gap within 6 years during the term of this administration, and then how long it would take if we use the current budget
Yeah.
allocated, which is 5.95 billion, and that was for the 91
Yeah.
billion, and not even for the latest 167, and that would take 60 years, 60 years. So, sino ba Benjamin natin? Baka yun na lang yung buhay by the time na matapos yung gap na yun for the 91,000 gap. But now, Your Honor, the funding requirement to complete all construction of school buildings and repair, iba pa rin yung number, Tama ba? 755, that's different. Sabi mo 167. Here. Okay. So, for the 167,901 classroom shortage, that would require, madaming zero, give me a second, 419,752,500,000, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our computation is about 420 billion.
The
So
same?
almost the same.
Okay.
It's actually the same, Mr. President. And I know that this is a challenge. Two challenges, actually, Mr. President. Number one is sourcing the funds. And then even though we source the fund, is also the absorptive capacity
Yes.
of building
That
these
is a big
classrooms.
problem, the absorptive capacity. Let's put that on record, because kung maghahagilap tayo ng pondo, kung sa maghahagilap lang, I know our chairman can produce. but it's really the absorptive capacity. Hindi, may out ka na. It is really the absorptive capacity that is the bigger problem on how we will fund that. Kaya it's we can't even discuss that. No? It's not going to happen in a year, in 2 or 3 years. So that's why the chart I had prepared during the hearing gave us options on how to spread out that deficit, Your Honor, which I actually already discussed with Secretary Mina of DBM.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to put that on record so that our numbers are aligned, and then
Yes.
I think it's the challenge to this body and also the responsibility of this body to help look for that 420 billion in the next few years.
Over the years.
Over
correct,
the years,
correct.
definitely. Funding that in 1 year is close to impossible. But I think it's important to bear that in mind, so that every time we craft the budget, we can divert and allocate some amount to help close the gap of 167 classrooms that our students require. Mr. President, on the next topics on repairs, no? And we all know that our country is top 3 most vulnerable country in terms of calamities and natural disasters. And year in, year out, we would see a lot of classrooms destroyed by either earthquakes or by typhoons. Most recently is Typhoon Paeng. And Mr. President, I would like to ask also the good sponsor on how many classrooms do we need to repair to date, Mr. President?
What I have, Your Honor, the total number of damaged classrooms per year, I have a chart, and for 2022, it's actually much lower than 2021 for the information of everyone, is 5,511 classrooms for 2022. But the reason why I have a table is because even if we spend for 2022, may nasira noong 2020, may nasira noong 2019, and all the way back to 2016. So the grand total, Your Honor, is 37,795 classrooms need to be repaired. And if I can just go ahead and tell you what the budget for this would be, it would be 45 billion pesos, Your Honor, 45.7 billion.
That's the amount we need to repair all the classroom. Madam
Based
Sponsor.
on the data that we have from 2016 to damages that happened during 2016 to 2022, 37,795.
Do we have the number for classrooms damaged even beyond 2016?
This representation does not. Do you have beyond 2016 or na-lump na ba yan sa 2016?
How much do we know?
Ano? Hindi ko yan naintindihan. These are the repairs based on the disasters since 2016 from the various disasters. But we have another item for just regular repairs. Okay. Your Honor, did Your Honor hear that? This is just, what I'm giving is just the numbers for that represent classrooms damaged due to disasters. Beyond 2016, before 2016, then that is lumped under another item, which is just yung repairs of classroom, wear and tear, and the ones before 2016. Saan yun? Mr. President, if I may just put some numbers here for clarity. For the Quick Response Fund, which would basically be used for the classrooms that are damaged, there in the NEP was 2 billion. I'm saying this by memory, no? So I will ask my team to correct me if I'm wrong. 2 billion, and then the Senate added another 2 billion, correct? So, mali. The House version was 2 billion, and then the Senate added 2 billion. So the total is 4 billion for quick response, both capital outlay and MOOE. So to be clear, yung dinagdag ng Senate is MOOE. Oh, ano ba?
For repairs. That's for repairs.
So ano na? So wala na tayong dinagdag. Okay, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Since the confusion here lies with the reality that we have hearings on the budget before we get the GAB. So the House pala already added what we would have added. So from the NEP, nadagdagan ng another 2 billion ang GAB, which kineri naman natin sa Senate.
Thank you,
So
Ms.
that is for quick response. And then there is also an item on repair and rehabilitation, which is 4.73 billion, Your Honor. Tama?
Wala pa. But Mr. President, from my notes and from the information that we gathered, including data from DepEd, the classrooms that we need to repair, this includes the wear and tear, as well as classrooms that were affected by typhoons and earthquakes, amounts to 413,000 classrooms. And using the benchmark of about 500,000 to repair one's classrooms, we will need 206 billion to repair. And if we include the 240 billion earlier, we will need approximately about 626 billion for new classrooms, as well as to repair old classrooms and the classrooms that were damaged recently. So I say this just to put on record and to bear in mind that the universe to just address our classroom needs, physical classroom needs, is about 626 billion, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we have different figures. So
Okay.
as we speak, so that we do not delay, allow me to
right.
reconcile these figures, because I agree with you. Let's put it out there so that we're clear about this. No, kasi my figures, Your Honor, are different.
Okay, Mr. President. These are the figures that we gathered, but we can reconcile it
Yes,
later
please.
on. Yeah.
Let's put it on record during the DepEd hearing at some point today, kasi mahirap naman yun na iba pa rin figures natin. No? I'm
Yeah.
sure we can. Let's do that later.
Okay,
Thank you,
Mr.
with
President.
your indulgence.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. So, just to put that on record, and it's a challenge, and I know that it will take more than a year to find that 600 billion to fulfill all of our requirements in terms of classrooms and repairs. On the next item, Mr. President, I'll go to another topic, Mr. President.
If I may just end on that topic with, to summarize what DepEd told me during the hearings, they have made a lot of interventions, no, to come up with alternative spaces. So the number that we were originally presented with went down because of these efforts that they have made, just so that at least the public knows, no, that a lot. And then the number was significant, yung bumaba po, Mr. President. I'll just have them dig it up later so I can put it on record.
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, another point why I raise this issue is also to look for other sources of funding. And the good sponsor pointed out correctly that the LGUs actually play a important role in terms of funding. And I remember when I was a mayor, there was this program of counterparting in which the DepEd gave 50% of the funds required for classrooms or for school buildings, and the LGU will have to come up with the other 50%. So in other words, to build one classroom, DepEd only comes up with the 50%. The other 50% comes from the local government. And that's a way of sourcing funds at the local level. So my point of the matter there, Mr. President, is aside from aside from the GAA, we can actually tap other sources of funds. And this calls for innovation in terms of financing, in terms of building classroom, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, on another topic, and this is a topic that's close to the heart of the good sponsor and as well as his representation. It's on the topic of SPED.
Unahan na kita.
Yes, Mr. President. I thank the good sponsor actually for, and of course the chairman of the Finance Committee for restoring the budget and even increasing it. And this is actually a very important program, considering that we have recently enacted the inclusive education law. And this funding, although I am lobbying to bring it up to 1 billion, nevertheless the 581 million is a good number to maintain the operations of our special education or inclusive education program. So, Mr. President, just basic questions on this, Mr. President. I saw that 96 million out of the 581 million is for the conversion of 16 SPED centers into what we now call ILRC, or Inclusive Learning Resource Center, Mr. President. I would like to ask the good sponsor, how much is it to convert one SPED center to ILRC, Mr. President?
Mr. President, 8 to 10 million for the to convert a SPED center to ILRC. Mr. President, for the information of our colleagues so that they can understand our discussion, there's a maybe we can spread into the record, that within a school, the ideal is to have a SPED center, but the ILRC is a center where all the support services are available.
Yes.
So the ILRC is not a classroom, where teaching and learning happens, but it is a support service area where students can be assessed, allied services like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, etc. can happen. Para lang clear, kasi yun nga, yung mga nakikinig sa atin, baka hindi nila alam yun. And on that note, I think 10 million, 8 to 10 million is the bare minimum, because if you look at the advances in science, to be able to come up with all these interventions, maliit yung 8 to 10 na yan. But we have to start somewhere.
Correct, Mr. President. And again, I thank the good sponsor for including 96 million and for the conversion. And I asked the amount because if you multiply one per region, so we have 16 SPED centers times 10. That's about 160 million pesos for conversion, and we're actually short by 60 million in terms of the conversion, just to hit a one per region conversion, Mr. President. And
By 60 million.
more or less about 60 million, Mr. President. So I this representation is sincerely recommending that we increase it by the capital outlay, to increase it from 96 million to 160 million, just to cover a conversion per region, so that we will have one model of ILRC per region. Of course, if we can do more, then so much the better. But at least meron tayong one per region for the
Yes.
ILRC, Mr. President.
We agree, Your Honor, and I will join you in trying to find ways to make that
Yes.
happen.
And we will submit to the committee, Mr. President, some potential sources of revenue.
Wonderful.
Potential sources of funding for this, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And lastly, Mr. President, I saw in the GAB that the flexible learning option, which originally amounted to 19 billion, was decreased to 4.3 billion, and it was
Yes.
scattered all over several programs. And I support this because a lot of the programs are also very important. I saw one program here, and has been a bone of contention for the last few years. This is the computerization program. Funds were allocated to the computerization program amounting to 4.2 billion. And it's now about 11.36 billion in terms of budget. I support this, Mr. President. And we all know that one of the learnings from the pandemic is to invest heavily in digitization and digitalization as well as computerization. And we're miles away in terms of the ideal setup for digitalization, Mr. President, in our schools and for our learners. So with that, Mr. President, I support that. But I remember every year, Mr. President, this will be a sticking point because the disbursement rates for the computerization is quite low. In 2018, it's 13%. In 2019, it's 26%. In 2020, 28%. Year 2021 is 23%, Mr. President. So, though I support the reappropriation to the computerization program, I would like to inquire from the good sponsor on what are the reforms that the department is undertaking in order to improve the disbursement on the computerization program.
In order
Mr.
to
President.
improve
The
on
disbursement.
the disbursement.
The utilization,
Oo,
Mr. President.
Because mababa.
Mababa
nga,
siya,
no?
Mr. President.
Yes,
I know
that's
the good sponsor knows about this, no? Because every year we encounter this, particularly the computerization program. Mr. President.
Oh, kaya nga. So is it your procurement? Is it ano ba? Kayo ba yan? Or DBM? Or what? Depends on the result of the procurement. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Wala kayong suppliers? What does that mean? I don't understand what that means. Wala bang nagbibid? Hindi ko yung kaya i-justify. Hindi ko yung kaya maintindihan.
Questions, yes,
Ma'am, we're organizing po a suppliers forum so that we can know what the suppliers can.
Okay.
We have that po on November 22, ma'am.
Suppliers Forum. Okay. Mr. President, the response I have is this. It's a procurement problem. So I ask, what does that mean? Does that mean walang may gustong mag-offer ng service, ng product nila? I don't know what it means. So I was also told now that what they are doing to address this procurement problem is that they will have a suppliers forum so that they can hear directly from the suppliers what products are available out there. Tama? Okay. And also, for the record, they are handling it themselves, no longer through PSDBM.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that information, and I support that, Mr. President. This is a recurring program of DepEd, and I think it's better that DepEd handles the procurement process. And would like to just flag the department as well as reiterating that this program for many years has low utilization rate, no? And it's important to address the issue of utilizing the budget, no? Especially
Yes.
for computerization and digitalization, Mr. President. So,
Yes, DepEd, narinig niyo yung concern na yan, ha? So, it's very difficult for us to justify increase in budget when the utilization is very low. So, even in my own areas of particular interest, banggitin ko na yung sa ECDC, na ang baba, of course, duman tayo sa COVID, ganon.
Isa pa
Pero,
yun.
some are able to do better, eh. So, we have to step it up because we won't be able to justify to DBM the request. They are nodding their heads, Your Honor,
Yeah,
that they
thank you.
recognize this problem.
thank you, Mr. President. Well, Mr. President, that That's all that I have for my question. Again, I commend the good sponsor for giving this representation an opportunity to suggest and to improve some of the items in the Department of Education, most especially the inclusive education program, which is very close to everyone's heart. Again, I congratulate.
Mr. Chairman, just to add before you end, I know I have his honor support with the other baby of our majority floor leader and this representation, yung Doktor para sa Bayan. And to extend that, the support for allied professionals kasi the human resource needed dito sa ating SPED programs, a lot of them have very specific medical training, di ba? Yung mga PTs, OTs, and so on and so forth. And we need to budget for them also. It will also support our
Correct.
inclusive education program, Your Honor.
Correct. It's one cycle, Mr. President, because the Dr. Para sa Bayan in turn will generate the professionals that we need for the
Yes,
inclusive
exactly.
education and for
Mid-jumps.
the ILRCs, Mr. President. So again, I congratulate the good sponsor and us and our Vice President for successfully opening our schools. And a lot of our kids are now going back to school, seeing their friends, seeing their teachers, and most importantly, learning. So congratulations
Yes,
to
Your
our
Honor.
Vice President.
Yes, that's so important.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
to
Mr.
the
President.
gentleman from Valenzuela.
Yes, Mr. President, just also to put on record, we have been espousing also that landmark legislation that we passed, which is the Teacher Education Council and the special education for children with special needs. Mr. President, next to interpellate and ask questions, the distinguished minority leader, Deputy Minority Leader, no other than the distinguished lady from Akbayan, Senator Risa Ontiveros. I move that she be recognized, Mr.
Our
President.
distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader, Senator Risa Ontiveros. Ma'am, mayong hapon, you are recognized.
Salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Maayong hapon po. Good Chair, may I please continue to ask some of the questions I began raising in the committee hearing and a few new ones na lumitaw mula nung
Sige.
hearing.
May we just get the permission of the Senate President that the Deputy Minority Leader will face me, no? Because he previously we faced, so with the permission.
Yes, actually, we were, during sessions, ordinary sessions, we wouldn't allow people to face their backs on the Senate President or the podium, as it is a proper tradition and protocol.
Practice, yes.
But it's okay. I'm very lenient. You know, I'm a cowboy. I think it's easier for both to address each other this way. For this particular budget hearing, it's all right.
Thank
It's
you.
all right.
I just
Thank you.
wanted to be mindful, Your Honor. Thank
Yes,
you for
as
the
long as
permission.
it's addressed still as the President, Senate
Yes.
President. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. President. And also, just for the record, together with my minority leader, since the plenary interpellations of the budget of the DBCC, of the government economic managers, we have, with the indulgence of the SP and Senate and the presiding officer, been facing the chair. So,
Yes, I've
with
been-
all due respect,
Yes.
Actually,
to
I've
our
been very. They
institution.
told me about that. Our very eagle-eyed secretariat here mentioned it to me. But you know, I'm quite lenient about that, particularly during this budget season, because it's very difficult to be looking at me and addressing me and yet asking the questions to the person behind you. So, for this reason, with the permission of the body, we will allow to skip this tradition for the budget season.
Make an exception
Make an
during this
exception.
budget season.
Correct.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President. But at any time, the presiding officer may tell this representation to revert to our usual body language. Inangle ko na po yung
No worries,
rotating
madam.
podium na ito
Yeah.
between the chair and the SP.
No problem po.
Salamat
Please proceed,
kayo.
please proceed.
Salamat kayo, Mr. President. So, Madam Chair, I would just like to initially reiterate my earlier statement that I am one with the Department of Education in pursuing accessible, quality, and equitable basic education. I share the views expressed by various stakeholders and the public that government should spend more on our education system as an investment now and for our future. However, Madam Chair, with our economic and fiscal limitations, we can only do so much with what we have allotted for the education sector. As such, it is prudent to ensure that the department effectively and efficiently utilizes the would-be authorized budget. I hope that the DepEd family will continue to bear this in mind as I wish them a productive and meaningful 2022 National Planning Conference this week. Naway maging produktibo at makabuluhan ang inyong proseso ng pagpaplano para sa sektor ng edukasyon. At the outset, Mr. President, I thank the committee, especially the chair, for introducing amendments increasing the budgets of at least 5 attached agencies, amounting to around 911.86 million pesos, so almost 1 billion pesos, and putting some funds into some of the advocacies I gladly share with the rest of the committee. I took note of and was grateful for the additional funding for teachers' training on reproductive health and HIV/AIDS education, the pooling of registered guidance counselors and other school-based mental health programs, the institutional support of CSOs, NGOs engaged in the accountability monitoring of school building projects, and others. However, Madam Chair, Mr. President, I would like to follow up on some concerns I inquired about during the budget hearing last September 29. For one, the calls for the realignment of DepEd's confidential funds remain in the public discussion. I advocated then for their realignment to the IP education program, while other colleagues wanted them to be realigned to the special education program or the child protection unit. So maaari ko po bang tanungin, Mr. President, Madam Chair, kung yung said proposed confidential funds ay na-realign na nga? O may confidential fund pa rin ba ang DepEd? Kung oo, magkanong halaga at para saan po?
Your Honor, may I start with the statement of the Secretary and Vice President during the hearing that she defers to the judgment of Congress to determine what to do with the confidential funds that are found in the NEP and the GAB. On that note, when we resumed session last week, I brought this to the attention of the body in caucus for the body to determine what it would like to do with the confidential funds. And there were a number of proposals on the table. So that remains for us as a body to determine, Your Honor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. So sa punto pong ito, gusto ko ring i-reiterate yung sinabi ni Minority Leader kanina na na-appreciate natin yung sinabi ni Secretary VP nung hearing na nagdi-differ nga sila sa wisdom ng Kongreso tungkol both sa propriety at sa halaga ng ganong item ng confidential funds sa DepEd. And since the issue of the confidential funds were raised, the DepEd was firm in its belief that they are legal, the confidential funds are legal, and that they need the fund to protect the learners. But, gaya ng napag-usapan na natin, Madam Chair, Mr. President, as expressed by the Secretary VP, they leave it to the wisdom of Congress to decide on the matter. So for the record, Madam Chair, Mr. President, I hope that our colleagues in the Senate will share the view that there are no extraordinarily compelling reasons to provide a confidential fund to the education agency. After all, Mr. President, Madam Chair, we should enable and empower school authorities to collaborate with national and local agencies to address and respond to their peace and order, law enforcement, and security needs. Mas magagamit natin ang confidential funds sa mas mahalagang prioridad para sa mga batang mag-aaral. And just for the record, Madam Chair, Mr. President, at the proper time, I will make the proper proposal regarding this realignment of DepEd's confidential funds. Dahil nabanggit ko na rin po, Madam Chair, kanina, Mr. President, na mas magagamit nga natin ang confidential funds sa mas mahalagang prioridad para sa mga batang mag-aaral, may I then ask my next questions about some of those
Of course.
more important priorities? Salamat po, Madam Chair. So, one other important concern raised during the budget hearing was the cuts to our special education and IP education programs. Pwede ko po bang itanong, magkano po bang inallocate para sa dalawang programang ito, SPED saka IP education, at kung, sa tingin po ng Madam Chair, itong mga allocation at present ay sapat para siguruhin yung equitable access to basic education?
First of all, thank you for those questions, Your Honor. First of all, Mr. President, I'd like to point out that during the hearing on the DepEd's budget, DepEd itself manifested that they will be the one to realign the funding for SPED that was removed from the budget. So the Senate committee report that we are now, which is now the basis of our discussion, reflects that initiative made by DepEd, which we appreciate kasi hindi na ho tayo yung naghanap. Sila na ho yung gumawa ng paraan. So there, Your Honor. That initiative came from them. With respect to IP, let me just give you the numbers now. No need. Good. Do you want me to put on record the SPED, or did my answer suffice?
Well, at least, Madam Chair, Mr. President, if in the Chair's opinion, the current allocations are sufficient to ensure equitable access to basic education.
Oo. That's a good question, Your Honor. Are the allocations sufficient?
Opo.
It's never sufficient. Ako na, as a mother who lost a child who was a special child, I can tell you that in my son's very short life, yung budget that had to go to specialist, hindi pa nga umabot yung anak ko sa speech therapist because he passed away before he was 1. Pero may occupational therapist na siya regularly, may physical therapist, may respiratory therapist, merong developmental pediatrician. He would have eventually needed so much more intervention. So earlier with the questions of our chairman of the Committee on Education, the amount allocated for the ILRCs, which is yung parang referral center, is just 8 to 10 million. Kulang na kulang yun, Your Honor, if we can think about it, di ba, yung pag-test ng, my son kasi, I'll just use him as an example, was perceived to be deaf, blind. He actually had a cleft lip and palate. So, yung medical interventions pa lang nun that would cost so much. So, yes, kulang talaga. But we have to start somewhere. Maganda yung, I think we can start with the recommendation of the chairman of Basic Ed na 60 million will complete at least the ILRC. And then, syempre, gusto rin natin ma-improve yung, what do you call this, yung disbursement and ng ating, so, utilization. So, are we okay with that for now, that amount? The DepEd family is nodding their head naman. So, for now, sufficient naman po yung allocation. Kung ako naman ang tatanungin, pakita natin na we can utilize this to the maximum and then we'll ask for extra for next year. No? I think it's a good place to start. Bagong-bago din lang naman yung batas eh.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair, and also always for sharing even from a very personal and painful yet unforgettable experience. Salamat po para doon. So, if I could just relate it to our first question, Mr. President, Madam Chair, may na-realign na po ba ang DepEd sa ngayon from its requested confidential funds to either of these programs, whether SPED or IP education?
No, yes, Your Honor, this has already been realigned,
Yes.
but not from the confidential fund.
Okay.
But this is done. This is already in our Senate version, Your Honor.
Salamat, Mr. President.
For the
Madam
record,
Chair.
for our colleagues, Mr. President, karamihan ng realignment, if not all, came from the flexible learning, no? Because at the time passed that budget for 2022, we had to prepare for the pandemic still continuing as it was then. But with more people vaccinated, with protocols, actually wala na nga halos protocols, the world moving on, we were able to reallocate the flexible learning. Again, also upon the initiative of DepEd.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. One of my later questions will also be about those pandemic-related protocols sa ating education
Your Hon-
settings. Yes, Madam
Sure,
Chair.
Your Honor. And
Salamat po.
Mr. President, may I respond to your concern
Yes,
on
please,
IP
Mr.
education?
President. Opo.
There has also been an alignment from flexible learning. So the total now is 154.431 million, Your Honor.
Salamat po, Mr. President, Madam Chair. So if neither of these two items that we've talked about so far, Mr. President, ay napag-realignan from the confidential funds, okay lang po, because some of my next questions will be about other possible items within the DepEd
Of course,
budget
Your
na
Honor.
mas makakapakinabang sa ganung realignment ng confidential funds. So just to continue, Mr. President, Madam Chair, during the budget hearing, I asked the DepEd to consider developing a program for IP teachers education. Ibig sabihin po, scholarships, recruitment, and deployment. So, maaari po bang humingi ng update kung may aksyon na pong ginagawa ang DepEd papunta sa direksyong ganoon?
But what are you doing about it? This is the facts. Kung ano pumili, anak ba yun? Babasahin ko? Piliin yung kailangan kong basahin. Okay. Arlet Castros. Okay. Okay. So, pero mas marami. Is this current? 4,000? Bago lang yan. Itong last time. Tama ba ito? Ganun karami? 4,000? Galing nga. So, ibig sabihin pinaril nyo na yan. Paano naman mabati ko naman kayo? Like 30,000? Or just give me a rough number. Hindi, no, I mean, what's a raw number of the left passers? Kasi I'm so proud to know that 4,000 belong to... belong to the...
Madyo. Yes, of course.
Pagbalik ko na lang.
Total lang nagpumasa ng pera. 4,000 of those are belong to the...
Joel, suspend muna natin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me proceed. Sorry for the delay. I was very interested in the topic as you were, so I wanted to give a comprehensive response. Since 2016, DepEd is happy to report that through their efforts in encouraging more students to take up education and teach in their communities, we now have 4,033 let passers, teachers who have passed the exam, who belong to the indigenous cultural communities. So they are now in the process of returning, them being hired in their respective communities. And I think we should be able to see results. Now, of course, it will take time, but we should be able to see results in the next few years, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chair. It's good to hear about this. And
Yes.
since nakapagsimula na rin ang DepEd nito since 6 years ago, actually yung panukala ko ay magkaroon ng ongoing program talaga, scholarship recruitment program para sa mga guro na nais maging guro mula sa IP communities upang mapalakas yung ating IP education programs. And I hope that we would even consider earmarking funds to support a program to attract learners from IP communities to enter into the teaching profession. Kung dagdag pa dito sa 4,033 let passers mula sa mga katutubong Filipino, kung meron tayong isa o 100 katutubong kabataan regularly na magka-interes at mainganyong mag-aral para maging guro, at itong 10 to 100 kada taon pa rin, at pagkatapos sila'y babalik sa kanilang mga komunidad. So pagkatapos ng let, hindi basta papasok sa pati sa non-IP schools na pinamumunuan ng DepEd, pero particularly sa mga IP communities, para dun sila magturo, no, pagka-graduate. Then masisigurado nating higit na walang maiiwanan, mas mapapalakas natin yung overall IP education sa bansa.
Your Honor, DepEd and our colleague from Akbayan are aligned on this matter. Banggitin ko na rin na with their efforts nga, we already have a total of 4,033 let passers, but we still have a gap, no? So to put it, kakaririn nila na ma-fill yung gap na yon. And if I may add, Your Honor, from personal experience, I have a favorite place that I hike to in Benguet, and exactly what you are describing, Your Honor. Vibrant ang kanilang basic education program doon because the teachers grew up there. They lived there, they grew up there, they became teachers, and they still teach in their own communities. Their kids are there. So it's not a very difficult process, Your Honor. So we all agree with our colleague.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President and Madam Chair, and for the response from DepEd na kakaririn nila ito para lang makonsolidate at maipagpatuloy yung nasimulan na nila with training IP students to become teachers, and then perhaps through this kind of a program na panukalan ng representation ito, na masiguro na mabalik sila at dun talaga magturo sa kanilang mga komunidad, such as in the community in Benguet that Madam Chair has mentioned. Moving on, Madam Chair, to another subject, I noticed that in the Senate version, the budget for the ECCD Council increases with the addition of 232.383 million pesos to fund the establishment of National Child Development Centers. And of course, wala akong pagtutol sa ganitong congressional initiatives, pero still, taking into account the low budget utilization and even performance of the Council, may kumpiyansa po ba at garansya tayo na ang dagdag pondo na ito, almost 250 million pesos, ay magagamit ng ECCD Council?
Yes, Mr. President, I share the concern of Her Honor. It's really a dilemma on the part of this representation to support the request for additional funding, and then we look at the utilization and it's low. So we dig a little bit deeper, and we determine what is the reason. In this case, Your Honor, there was a very clear reason. There was a memo circular known as Memo Circular Number 3 of 2022, which prevents agencies from entering into memo agreements with LGUs. Specifically, it says MC3 provides that all officers in charge, or OICs, at the time OIC because of the transition, Your Honor, are not allowed to do this except for food, energy, and transportation sector. So naipit sila, Your Honor, because of that.
At
So
ano po
we
yung-
also
Yes.
pushed, we asked for their assurance because pag nilagyan na naman natin to, tapos hindi na naman magawa, wala na, hindi tayo makakahingi ulit for them.
Yun na nga po, Mr. President, Madam Chair, at sayang naman kung hindi, kasi napaka-importante ng mandate ng ECCD Council. So, dagdag sa mga solusyon sa problemang ganito na sumunod sa MC3, pero bigyang daan pa rin yung performance at better, higher budget utilization ng ECCD Council. In addition, maari po bang hingiin yung detalye ng NCCD work plans And may I ask the chair, pwede ko bang hilingin sa chair na i-require yung ECCD Council magsumite po ng quarterly report sa progress ng implementasyon ng proyektong ito.
We will fully support that, Your Honor, because it's our way also of, holding them accountable for the very precious funding that we have found for them, Your Honor. We support that. So, take note. Saan ba si ECCD? Ikaw ba? Okay. Ayan. Your Honor, they have Mr. Isip is giving me a copy of their catch-up plan, which they have prepared. I have one copy. Online tayo kung pwede, but we're happy that you presented. We have a soft copy. We can give Her Honor the hard copy.
Yes, please, Mr. President,
Okay.
Madam Chair. Maraming salamat po. Dahil kung may catch-up plan na sila, baka ito yung unang urgent step in a work plan and can give us also an indication kung papaano nila dudugtungan itong catch-up plan in the quarterly and then yearly work plans na magiging basehan ng pag-ulat nila sa atin. So, thank you very much for that, Mr. President. Madam Chair, salamat po. In a way, magbibigyan nitong catch-up plan at yung work plans and quarterly report na ibibigay nila sa atin, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Through that, mabibigyan tayo ng sneak peek into hopefully what will be a better COA report on ECCD in the coming years, the next 6 years. So before I proceed to my next question, Mr. President, Madam Chair, by the way po, does the ECCD Council already have its executive director? At ang DepEd-Sec ba ay nakapagrekomenda na ng appointment ng official na iyon kay Presidente? Nakapag-convene na ba at nakapagplano yung ECCD Council sa ilalim ng administrasyon?
Mr. President, the recommendation of DepEd is in Malacanang already. They're awaiting approval? Appointment.
All right. So I hope that goes well, Mr. President, Madam Chair, para mas mabuo pa yung complement
Yes.
no ng mga opisyal natin sa DepEd family. And with also the eventual appointment of the executive director, I hope that the ECCD Council will improve its performance and that we get the commitment of the DepEd as its mother agency, especially since we are commemorating National Children's Month this November. So, happy National Children's Month din po, hindi lamang sa DepEd, pero lahat ng ating mga children-related agencies sa gobyerno. I've gone through, Madam Chair, Mr. President, my follow-up questions from our committee hearing. So I just have a few more new agenda which have come up in the interim. So for one, Madam Chair, a group of education reform advocates, Aral Pilipinas, reached out to my office and presented the case for adopting safe school calculators in our educational facilities to ensure the health and safety of teachers and learners. So ito po, kaugnay na ng pandemic protocols na binanggit ni Madam Chair kanina. And I believe that Aral Pilipinas made representations with the officials of DepEd, particularly USEC Chris Ablan. So, Mr. President, Madam Chair, ano na po ang status ng panukala sa paggamit ng safe school calculators na dinevelop ng Aral Pilipinas sa ating mga eskwelahan?
Mr. President, they are considering this. Of course, they welcome all the recommendations and suggestions, especially when it comes to the health and well-being of the students. So they will update us when they have fully assessed this recommendation, and maybe they can even improve on it.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair, and with the Chair, I will await that update. Since DepEd allows the optional use of masks in schools and the ventilation of our classrooms remains a concern as part of COVID-19 prevention. At ngayong araw lamang, or nung isang araw lamang, Mr. President, Madam Chair, may isang headline na nagbabala po ang DOH na posibleng magkameron tayo ng outbreaks mula sa mga unvaccinated students. Nag-issue po ba ang DepEd ng mas specific, mas updated na guideline para i-enable yung mga principal natin at yung mga guro na maging handa, no, in terms of COVID-19 prevention and control? Halimbawa, may mga nakatayo bang COVID-19 infection control committees sa mga paaralan sa ilalim ng gabay ng DepEd?
Yeah, Your Honor, it is now optional to use a mask, but I asked what the practice is, what have they observed, and most teachers and students still wear masks, which is actually consistent with my own observation. Even my son, when I ask him, when I go around, a lot of children in the non-school environments that I've seen are still very carefully masking, unless outdoor lang talaga, Your Honor.
Opo. And I share, Mr. President, the wisdom of the Madam Chair that it is still the better part of prudence. Diba? Sinasabi natin, an ounce of prevention is worth a
Yes.
pound of cure. So yung pagsuot pa rin ng ating mga estudyante ng mask habang pumapasok sila. Anecdotally, I've heard from some private school teachers and administrators na sila mismo ay policy pa rin na mag-mask ang mga estudyante at guro nila while in their campuses. Kahit maliliit na campus lamang ito. And I could only wish that national government, including DepEd, had maintained this practice. Pero kung hindi man, dahil optional na nga po, na para po sa akin talaga, Mr. President, Madam Chair, nakakabahala, I hope that DepEd will issue additional guidelines, no, for preparation for COVID-19 prevention and control. Would they consider yung pagkakaroon ng COVID-19 Infection Control Committee sa mga paaralan sa ilalim ng DepEd?
Okay. Your Honor, the efforts of DepEd are continuing when it comes to COVID prevention and how to deal with it. They have encouraged, they are encouraging all the schools to coordinate with their local governments epidemiological surveillance unit, Your Honor, which I think is this representation also supports, because from my understanding sa LGUs and our experience, it's very dependent on LGU policy and what their surveys are showing, no, kung obviously it's a infectious disease, so it is cluster based, so it's very important that they coordinate with the LGU, Your Honor. So tuloy-tuloy naman, no, the DepEd shares Her Honor's concern that we should always be vigilant and be proactive about prevention.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. I can still only wish na yung isang first and pinakasimpleng bahagi nung vigilance na iyon, yung mask wearing, ay nanatiling or posibleng maging muli bahagi ng menu ng DepEd sa ating mga paaralan. And I'm glad that Madam Chair, Mr. President, mentioned the coordination also with the epidemiological units of the schools, with the LGUs. Kasi nga po, well, mababanggit ko rin po iyan, ano, in relation dun sa possible realignment ng confidential funds, pati po yun, mas makakatulong para sa pagtatayo at pagsasanay ng mga COVID-19 infection prevention and control committees sa mga paaralan, o kaya naman yung sariling epidemiological surveillance capacity ng DepEd para sa mga notifiable diseases, at least habang umaandar pa yung pandemic. In addition to the continuing efforts of DepEd, yung encouraging nila sa schools na makipag-coordinate sa LGUs, Mr. President, Madam Chair, ano po yung mga available budgetary provisions for schools and classrooms for COVID-19 prevention and control, like testing, contact tracing, isolation of probable cases of COVID-19, at saka assistance din sa mga guro at estudyante na maaring mag-test positive?
LGU, no? It's LGU. Sabihin ko na consistent yan sa IATF. No? Pwede ko sabihin yun, yeah. Okay. Your Honor, actually the decision of DepEd to make masking optional for schools was also based on the IATF discussions and recommendations that included DOH recommendations. So they really also took those into consideration in making that final decision. On that note, regarding any kind of support that would be needed by the schools, whether they're teachers, other personnel, or students, that is also now done in coordination with the LGU, which this representation feels is reasonable, because if there are cases, it would revolve around the LGU, not DepEd per se, but it would be an LGU concern, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chair. So, do we know if elsewhere in the GAA may mga items for LGUs na in coordination sa mga eskwelahan magkaroon ng budget para sa ganitong mga COVID-19 prevention and controls?
This is a special provision granted in the Senate version. Yung school MOOE, they can use it for COVID-19 is in faculty and staff.
Okay. Your Honor, your question, I can answer that during the DOH hearing, which I also chair.
Yes.
Because I remember in our preparation, meron pa rin naman tayong kahit papanong funding for that. But may I also put on record that may flexibility naman ang DepEd to use other MOOE for that person. I think this is an amendment we made at some point. Special provision, there you go. So nandiyan naman yon. But we're being candid in saying that a lot of this they also work with the LGU on that, no? Because I guess the approach, the response shouldn't really be centralized then, no? It should be location based, Your Honor.
Yes. And Mr. President, Madam Chair, fair enough. I can propound this question again in a different form during the budget plenary interpellation on the DOH budget. And speaking of flexibility, again, no, yung spirit of flexibility natin within the DepEd budget, I really hope at the proper time masuportahan ng ating mga colleagues in terms of realigning the confidential funds to other items within the DepEd budget. And totoo po, Mr. President, Madam Chair, yung mask policy, current mask policy, based on the IATF recommendation. Pero alam po natin, di ba, maraming kaso, lalo na nung mula simula ng pandemya, na hindi lagi ang DOH ang pangunahing nasusundan sa mga desisyon kaugnay ng pandemic response natin. So, at every moment, I think it's always still valuable na igiit na public health approach above anything else ang mangibabaw. And even now, di ba, Mr. President, Madam Chair, alam po natin na slightly iba ang at least pronouncements ng DOH spokespersons or OICs about the mask policy. May mababasa pa rin tayo between the lines na yung preference talaga ng ating mga public health experts to sustain masking. And I think I did mention this in another budget plenary, Mr. President, Madam Chair, na kahit nga po sa South Korea na di hamak na mas maunlad pa sa atin, they have sustained their mandatory mask policy for at least 3 more months. Dahil batid din po nila na nagmumutate pa rin yung virus into different variants and subvariants. At may iba pang mga respiratory diseases na mapipigilan din ng pagmamask. Bukod pa po, Madam Chair, Mr. President, sa COVID-19.
Tama naman po yun.
Opo.
Tama naman po yun.
Salamat, Madam Chair, Mr. President. So, moving on po, in the proposed 2023 budget, tama po ba na 9.8 billion pesos ang inalot para sa DepEd School Building Program? At tama po ba na ito ay sapat para sa roughly 2,400 classrooms, samantalang kulang tayo ng 91,000 classrooms nationwide?
Actually, Your Honor, as I go through my file, I just have quick notes here on the most important figures. And ang sa ating basic education fund, it's increased from 5.95 billion to 23 billion, Your Honor. So, as was discussed during the interpellation of Senator Gatchalian, in the hundreds of billions talaga ang gap natin. We will not be able to fund that immediately. So just my staff is just clarifying with me, 9.8 billion ang
Yes.
sa NEP. Yung 5.9 must be the GAA, no? GAB. So I was basing my 5.95 sa GAB. No, sorry. No.
9.8 billion in the net, total na
Oo.
po 23 billion.
Anyway,
Tumaas.
23 billion na po ang nasa GAB and nasa Senate version.
Okay. Just for school building program, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Tama po ba?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Just particularly, Madam Chair, Mr. President, for the school building program, yung 23 billion?
Yes, pero
Okay.
iba pa yung funding yan for mga repairs.
Yes.
These are just for the new classrooms, Your Honor.
Apo,
What?
apo.
Sorry. Let me clarify that. Can we open my file so that I'm looking at my file?
Sa akin nga 9.8 pero sabi ni Chair 23 na. Pero 10 na. New building. So.
Okay. So, Your Honor, the Basic Education Facility Fund is 23 billion, and that is broken down for new construction, which is 15.8, almost 15.9 billion, repairs and rehabilitation, which is at 4.7 billion, and so on and so forth. School furniture, electrification, engineering, and priority school health facilities, which is actually zero.
Alin po yung zero, Mr. President, Madam Chair?
Yung priority school health facilities. Ito yung washing facilities na priority, no? Actually, Your Honor, ito yung request talaga din ng DepEd kasi ito yung washing, which Her Honor and I will agree is the easiest, no, preventive aside from masking, hand washing.
Opo.
So, if Her Honor is concerned about that, I will not argue because I also share that concern.
Definitely, Mr. President, Madam Chair, again, another area where we can look to realigning certain funds for which there is no extraordinarily compelling reason to such items na compelling talaga, lalo na in the pandemic.
I just need to put
Madam
on
Chair.
record, though, that I am going to assume, and I will look to my staff for confirmation and maybe LBRMO, na baka kasama kasi ito sa devolution na ang dapat na bang gumawa nito is mga LGU. Tama ba? So itong school health facilities, kung pwedeng dagdagan, madagdagan. No answer. But anyway, Your Honor, we share the concern that was raised.
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. President. So my figure for at least the new classrooms has been corrected. It's not only 9.8 billion, it's 15 billion pesos.
Yes, Your Honor.
Tama
For
po,
new
Madam
classroom,
Chair.
it's
Yes.
15 billion.
Okay po, Madam Chair. So, Mr. President, so that would be good for roughly 3,600 classrooms, new classrooms, I mean. Samantalang ang gap natin is at 91,000 classrooms nationwide.
Ano nyo kinocompute yun? Divided by 2.5 million. So 15 divided by 2.5, which is yung 15 billion. 6,000? 6,347 new classrooms, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chair. So 6,000 new classrooms that can be built next year in a gap, a shortfall of 91,000. So about 2.5%, if I'm
Actually, Your Honor, as I
computing correctly in my
clarified
mind.
during the interpellation of Senator Gatchalian, that was an old figure. The updated figure is 167,000 classrooms ang shortage.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Na-deja vu po ako, Mr. President, Madam Chair, parang sa housing, sa DSUD budget, na year on year, lumalaki yung housing gap, and it's our same national situation sa ating classrooms gap. Pinapayagan din po ba natin ang DepEd na gamitin ang budget niya para mag-rent out ng unutilized classrooms ng private schools para mas ma-meet natin yung gap, at least itong coming school year?
Can you say that again?
Tama po ba yun? Is it tama po ba na we are allowing DepEd to utilize its budget to rent unutilized classrooms of private
To rent
schools to meet
unutilized
the gap
classrooms.
this coming school year?
Iba yan, baliktad yan. Let's talk about it later. May ganun ba kayo? Pero di ba meron na kayong other ways? Di ba hindi? Not authorized. Gusto niyo bang gawin yun? May proposal kayo? To allow you to rent? Not na kayo ang mag-rent. Meron po ganito. DepEd may be authorized to use school facilities. Oh, ito, meron nga. Okay. Sabi mo wala. Okay. Your Honor, I'm ready with the answer. There is a special provision that allows DepEd, that authorizes DepEd to use, DepEd may be authorized to use school facilities of private institutions. DepEd shall pay rental fee for such use.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Dahil yung sagot sa mga tanong na ito in terms of our classroom gap at in terms of kailangan pa nating umupa ng mga unutilized private school classrooms ay in the affirmative. Yung tanong ko po, Madam Chair, bago po yung follow-up question doon, may cap po ba on how much we can rent those unutilized private school classrooms for? May limit po ba? Or range ng rentals?
There's none, Your Honor. No, the special provision does not mention that.
Salamat.
Any cap.
Salamat, Madam Chair. So, given these two matters, no po, yung lumalawak na classroom gap natin at yung kailangan pa nating umupa ng unutilized private school classrooms, ano po, Madam Chair, Mr. President, yung plano ng DepEd to address these widening gaps in infrastructure development? At kung na-amend na ng DepEd yung guidelines nila to factor in new normal conditions, like having higher ceilings, having bigger windows para i-improve po yung ventilation ng mga gusali at classroom nila. Kasama na po ba yun sa design nung how many? 6,000 plus classrooms, new classrooms na i-construct.
Allowing blended if the public schools don't have the capacity. But that's the exception to your rule, right? Okay, so I can say that the general rule is full face-to-face. But if no sa lugar mo may, di ba, may problem, particularly disaster-stricken areas, which is doon naman talaga nagkaka-shortage.
Your Honor,
May dagdag ka? So how it can really help?
Your Honor, let's be clear that the general rule of DepEd is face-to-face learning. However, in areas, in schools where there is an inability to deliver full face-to-face, and this could be because of shortage of classroom, especially in disaster-stricken areas, blended learning may be availed of. And on that note, they are reviewing the blended learning programs to really institutionalize this in a way that can be truly used to address this problem we have with the shortage of classrooms, Your Honor.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. I do appreciate that. In fact, isa sa mga huling tanong ko ay tungkol nga dun sa possibility of a return, even partially, to some kind of blended learning on and off in the future. Pero still, moving forward, hopefully, to yung pagpapatuloy at pag-expand ng face-to-face learning. And I'm sure yan ang optimal na mode
Of course, yes, Your Honor.
na sinusuportan, sinusulong ng DepEd. So may plano po ba sila, say in the next 6 years, para i-arrest yung widening ng gap sa infra and paano talaga ma-close yung gap na iyon? And particularly in the next year, higher ceilings, bigger windows na ba to facilitate better ventilation? At least starting with those 6,000 plus new classrooms na i-construct.
Bigger budget. Pwede naman talaga, no? Di ba you have ongoing talks with LGUs ba yun, yung regarding the Mandanas ruling? Or that's too complicated? Kasama ko pa sa usapan yun. Ha? Oo. So budgetary talaga, di ba?
Oo. Mr. President, it is clearly a budgetary issue. DepEd is committed and would be willing to handle a bigger budget to address the shortage. And other than that, it is really the institutionalizing of the blended learning program. This, Your Honor, is my personal input here. I truly appreciate the position taken by DepEd on a return to face-to-face.
Yes.
But we recognize that from the start, they have carved out an exception that where there is an inability to conduct face-to-face, then we must utilize other modes of delivering the education. That's where they would like to improve on the blended learning. And that I will address DepEd directly, that I appreciate because it is a clear exception. Hindi yung baha-bahala na kahit anong klaseng blended learning, hindi na papasok ng mga bata. Gusto ko yun, Your Honor, na very clear lang. Kasi it has been scientifically, there's data that shows that no intervention versus blended learning versus full face-to-face. Eh di syempre, dapat magkaroon naman ng intervention which would be the blended learning. But it should not take the place of face-to-face when face-to-face is available.
I fully agree with that, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Pero ngayon ko mas na-appreciate na unfortunately, baka blended learning is not going to be completely a thing of the past
Yes.
very soon. And malungkot mang tanggapin, pero ngayon, akala ko kanina hindi central sa appreciation ng DepEd dito sa infra problem yung component ng response of blended learning. Pero ngayon, parang mas na-appreciate ko na they're really factoring it in as the pangpuno, no, pantawid, habang hinahabol nating pilit yung lumalawak na infra gap. But having said that, Madam Chair, Mr. President, maybe if I just make a third and last pitch about this, if DepEd can come up with a plan to address the widening gaps in infra development, at kung i-schedule nila ito over the next 6 years, at least magiging isang gabay din sa atin dito,
Yes,
po, sa
definitely.
Kongreso. Yes, na ito yung optimal, maximal plan sa nila if the budget would allow. At least makikita natin what we can muster year on year. And then, at least meron na silang plan B or pangpuno na blended learning. Pero
Yes.
just to also make that of record, Madam Chair. And my last pitch about yes, Madam Chair,
On this,
Mr.
no,
President.
on this note, I just wanted to make a quick response. During the DBCC briefing, this representation took that up also because we wanted, using the old figure of 91,000, which is also the figure Her Honor has, we wanted DBCC to be aware of these figures so that they can also come up with that plan because I am certain DepEd will take any extra funding that will be made available to them. So this is really looking at it from the bigger picture. How much are we willing to allocate to address this shortage? And on that note, Mr. President, I'd also like to point out that in my committee report last year, in the Committee on Sustainable Development, Innovation, and Futures Thinking, my Futures Education report showed the history that, in fact, blended learning was not invented during the pandemic. It has always been around. But it became, parang pwede nang manalo yata yan ng word of the year, di ba? It became a common we started using it and hearing it more often because many countries had to resort to it. But on that note, Your Honor, again, in the same way that it was introduced last year for a more effective delivery, it should be used in the proper time at the proper place. And I think we are aligned with DepEd. All three of us here, Your Honor, are aligned on that note. I just wanted to put it there that at least this Senate has come out with that. I am just showing, and I will pass this on to Your Honor here. My committee report actually even includes a cartoon of the Archie's comic book. No, it's a futures themed edition, and it says Betty High School 2021, and it shows here how she tells her mother that class is about to start, mag-online na siya. And this edition came out before the pandemic.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Prophetic,
Archie,
Mr.
so-
President, Madam Chair.
Kailan ba ito lumabas? 1990s? Or basta before the pandemic nung lumabas ito? I'll share this with you. So, Your Honor, like you, let's use it in ways that it can enhance. Pero sana not as an excuse, which I have not seen with DepEd, in fairness lang, as an excuse not to go back to face-to-face.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Just to make of record also yung related concerns about blended learning na hopefully DepEd will keep in mind while it maintains blended learning as a, if not the primary, a secondary, complementary element in and as part of catching up with our infrastructure development also in the next years, the matters of ensuring the quality of blended learning modalities and addressing old issues of the learning materials, the parental support, dahil ang pagtingin natin ay ang mga magulang bilang learning facilitators din tayo, and the old issue also of mobile teachers. Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Oh, and just sorry, lastly, kasama na po ba sa disenyo, Mr. President, Madam Chair, of the 6,000 plus new classrooms to be constructed, yung higher ceilings and bigger windows to improve ventilation?
Being redesigned. Being redesigned, ma'am.
Yes. Kasama yun sa, sa consideration.
Yes.
They have new designs, Your Honor, and the experiences of the pandemic will definitely be included in the final designs that they will come up with, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. That's very good to hear. Kanina po, pinag-uusapan natin, Mr. President, Madam Chair, yung low utilization rates ng ECCD. Ngayon naman po, may briefer mula sa Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department observing low obligation rates in education human resource development programs. So 26.9% lamang ang obligation rate. At pati sa textbooks and instructional materials, 25.9% lang ang obligation rate. Now, these low obligation rates would of course further contribute to our learning losses. Kasi hindi nakapagsanay ang guro, walang learning materials na magagamit. Bukod pa na may delay ang PSDBM sa procurement ng learning materials ayon sa ulat. And these delays have deprived our teachers and learners of adequate training and education materials. So, interesado po ako, Mr. President, Madam Chair, ano po yung plano ng DepEd para sa mga gastusing ito na mahalaga to address learning loss? Lalo na sinasabing tayo yung pinaka naapektuhan ng learning poverty. May provision rin po ba sa ating budget to support, ayun, napag-uusapan kanina kasi yung blended learning. Ano po yung item sa ating budget to support a return or a sustaining of blended learning?
Can you look for that? What item in the budget supports blended learning?
Wait, ito muna. Ito muna. Mr. President, we have updated amounts now. So, hindi, my dear. Parang mali yung binilugan mo. Ibinilugan mo, ano ko bibigay? Di anak ko pa rin. 28 so. Tingnan mo. I'm asking them to clarify, Your Honor, the figures given to me. I was confused with the figures given to me, so I'm asking them to clarify it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Regarding... okay. The budget for computerization, Your Honor, is 8.48 billion, so that directly supports blended learning, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chair. What about the low obligation rates education human resource development programs? Alam po natin na isa sa matagal na programa natin, pero isa din sa mga susi para masolusyonan yung ating education crisis ay teacher training. So directly impacted po kung ang obligation rate natin dito ay 26.9% lang. And then ano rin po yung plano kaugnay ng itaas yung obligation rate sa textbooks and instructional materials. Kasi basic materials din or tools ng ating mga guro at estudyante para humabol dun sa learning loss.
Pero last year, para masabi mo, last year, were your numbers better? Sure? For textbooks. Eh, yung HRD, would you know? Sure ka? Sure ka, ha? Okay. Pero yung HRD ba, affected na? Affected na. Basta may procurement.
Oh, the teachers, yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you for your patience, Your Honor. I really
Yes,
also
Mr.
wanted to
President.
get to the bottom of this. For HRD and the textbook budget, it could have really been affected by the election ban, Your Honor. Let's recall that ang HRD is training of our teachers. Eh, lahat naman po yan na-deploy sa election-related tasks, no? And so not only were they pulled out to be doing other tasks, the teachers themselves, but there would also be bans on procurement, no, of anything related to this. So then may procurement ban then for textbooks, but I am assured, and I can try to look for the figures for my own comfort also, that the utilization in the previous year, which was not an election year,
Yes.
was much better, Your Honor.
I see. Yes, Mr. President, Madam Chair, sasabihin ko rin nga po sana na hindi naman covered ng election period at election ban period yung buong taon kung saan tinaya na 26.9% lang at 25.9% lang ang obligation rates for these two important components of education. At napaka-importante to the point na di po ba yung mga education reform advocates, yung iba sa kanila sinasabi na kahit kulang pa ang ating classrooms, kahit kulang pa kahit hindi pa natin na update lahat ng ating mga textbooks at ibang instructional materials, basta't ayusin natin for one yung teacher
Yes, Your Honor.
education, yung teacher training. Yan yung magiging susing element in the classroom or in any learning settings dahil gagawa ng paraan, didiskarte talaga yung mga teachers natin.
Mr. President, I could not agree with our colleague any more than exactly how she said it. No, teacher training and the procurement of these resources na gagamitin para magbasa, mag-aral, cannot be compromised in any way. No, so even if there was an election ban, ideally we should see numbers that maybe dip a little bit, no, pero hindi naman ganito kasama. So we will also go back to this. But to be clear, Your Honor, for 2021, okay, the teachers training was 84.75%. So maganda, okay naman po siya, no, if you ask me. Siguro nga naapektuhan, pero can we get assurance from DepEd na yun lang talaga yung reason, ano? Hindi na dapat may iba pang rason. Pero we know, di ba, DepEd has been expressing their concern din na talagang nahahatak yung attention and oras ng teachers pagka-eleksyon. But the textbook was still quite low. It's 25%. Baka can you just check, is there another reason? Were you going through a revamp or something? Kasi pakababa naman, ano?
Yun na nga po.
Or tumigil ba kayong mag-procure nung pandemic? Ano bang nangyari nga?
When in fact, ironically, Mr. President, Madam Chair, panahon ng pandemic, panahon ng blended learning, mga modular learning din bilang component nun, lalong importante yung pagkakaroon nitong mga textbooks at saka instructional materials.
Nito. Oo. Yeah. The utilization rate was also affected by the transition into a new administration, Your Honor. But in any case, they now have a technical working group to address this. Kasi yung goal sana natin nga is hindi maabala ang trabaho, no, yung delivery nito. Noted po yan
Maraming
to our
salamat.
dear colleague, yes.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Sana po yung isang output ng technical working group will be a plan para habulin yung mas maayos na obligation rates, at least in these two areas, Madam Chair. Would the Madam Chair know from DepEd kung na-identify na rin ng technical working group itong concerns na ito, itong dalawang ito? Are they going to work on them?
Output na ba yung technical working group niyo?
Can you guys keep on your mask? Kasi nakikita ng nanay ko yung mga nasa likod ko daw walang mask. I'm not kidding. Yung nanay ko.
Yes, ma'am. We're reviewing both for the procurement of supplemental learning resources, the policy on that, as well as the volume side on to shorten the period of time to market.
Okay.
Tech.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. President, I'm getting the assurance that they are looking into all this. They're looking at the time it takes to do the procurement, to shorten the time, and addressing these concerns in general, Your Honor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully, when the technical working group has produced its findings or recommendations or report, they can furnish the Senate
Yes.
a copy through Mr. President, Madam
Noted.
Chair, and
Okay.
the Chair of maybe for our Senate
It's noted,
Education
Your Honor.
Committee. Salamat po, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Madam Chair, some of our colleagues also took note of the increase in government assistance and subsidies for 2023 amidst the low disbursement rate of the program. So, para pong yung pinag-usapan nating medyo nakaka-worry na sitwasyon sa ECCD, gusto nating dagdagan ng budget, pero mababa ang disbursement rate niya. So, maaari ko po bang tanungin, paano ini-intend ng DepEd i-improve at bilisan yung government assistance and subsidy disbursement?
Every year, di ba? We answered that same question.
Mr. President, every year we take note of these figures, and every year this item is fully utilized. For the information of those watching us, this is government assistance, subsidies to private schools. Gamit na gamit ho yan, kulang pa nga every year, although this year magandang malaking nabigay. The only reason why at the time we take up the budget, it would show a low utilization is because the school year calendar is different from the calendar year, the fiscal calendar year. So by the end of, may first sem, parang first sem, second sem yung tranches yan, Your Honor, but it is always fully utilized.
I see, Madam Chair. All right, thank you for that. Though some advocates, some education advocates did reach out to my office requesting consideration of the SPED, ECCD again, and K-3 learners as priority groups in the disbursement of the vouchers program. So, maaari ko po bang matanong ano yung posisyon ng DepEd sa ganitong panukala at yung posibilidad na ma-consider ang mga ganito?
Yeah. Well, Your Honor, I will answer as the person who has defended the budget of DepEd for the 4th year straight. It's a very difficult question kasi lahat naman ng areas na binanggit ng ating kasamahan importante, no? SPED, sama na natin dyan yung IP, education, lahat po yan napakahalaga. They're all close to my heart as well. But I know from many discussions, including sa city namin ng Taguig, and idamay ko na ang Valenzuela because kasama ko si Senator Gatchalian when we had hearing sa DepEd, hearing niya actually. na very effective ang gas program natin, yung subsidy to private schools, even before the pandemic, but I would imagine even during the pandemic, because it is actually cheaper to support a private school than to put up new schools. Yung putting up new schools, maghahanap ka pa ng lugar. Tapos dadaan pa yan sa proseso kung, syempre, bago yan. Siguraduhin mong yung lugar na yan is the best, di ba? Hindi pwede na, it cannot be in just any area. And then you will have to hire the teachers. And also, to make a long story short, it was determined that it is really cheaper to support. And because we do live in a environment where we recognize that the private schools are our partners in the delivery of education, that support has continually been there, Your Honor. Again, I didn't even take a look at DepEd in answering this question because I do feel strongly about the gas program as well, Your Honor. Ang laking factor na ang daming nagsara ngayon na private schools because of the pandemic naman. My answer was pre-pandemic. And it became a big burden also because maraming naglipatan sa public schools, which is why a lot of them now have to have, kung dati wala silang twice a day classes, ngayon kailangan na mag-twice a day. So we have to find that balance. But I support Her Honor's concern for more budget for the other items that she mentioned, including SPED, IP, and others, Your Honor.
Salamat, Madam Chair, Mr. President. In searching for that balance, I guess that principle will always be cited and aspired for. For example, in broader education reform processes also, such as the EDCOM 2 na ipinasa natin nung bago magsara yung nakaraang Kongreso, and hopefully can provide a framework to look at all the long-standing problems in our education crisis, in learning poverty and whatnot, and aid us moving forward. At least ang mahalaga po, kahit sa pamamagitan ng ating budget interpellations, plenary debates, ma-put on record and maipasok sa public conversation yung mga advocacies nitong mga grupo, special
Yes, Your
education
Honor.
advocates, early childhood education advocates,
Yes.
yung
Hindi
mga
ko nga nabanggit
primary,
yun, but,
K to
sama ko na
K to 3.
kasi
Opo.
as you know, alaga ko din talaga yung early childhood, Your Honor. So we are on the same page on this.
Salamat, Madam Chair, Mr. President. We also recognize the value of providing access to a school feeding program to ensure that our learners are satisfied, healthy, and ready to learn. So, paano po i-implementa yung programang ito next year at anong mga innovations, kung mayroon, ang i-introduce ng department?
Mr. President, the DepEd continues to recognize and support their feeding program as a vital component of ensuring that we have students that are healthy, that are ready to learn. Sadly, we still have a situation where children go to school hungry, malnourished, undernourished, with various ailments because they are obviously more susceptible to conditions, medical conditions, when they are not properly nourished. So now that there is in-person classes, they will revert to school-based feeding programs, Your Honor. There will no longer be distributions to the household. Does Her Honor want any more details?
Even if in writing, Madam Chair, Mr. President, it would help. Kasi
Okay.
napansin ko kaagad na, i-discontinue na pala yung distribution to households.
Sa school na po.
Sa school na
Oo,
po,
sa school
kasi
na.
school-based
So,
feeding
just to be clear,
programs.
nag-change lang yung mode of delivery.
Okay.
But it will be delivered to schools where it was originally naman po, prior to the pandemic.
Opo.
Diba?
Hinahanap ko nga po, somewhere in my notes, meron pa akong, ito, kasi unless decided na finally ang DepEd na one template for the whole country ito, na wala ng distribution sa mga bahay, still there may be particular innovations na pwedeng i-consider, lalo na halimbawa sa mga food poor areas. By this I mean, Madam Chair, Mr. President, kasi in my meetings with some groups, yung isang particular interest that was brought to my attention is the possibility of moving from targeted to universal social feeding programs, lalo na po dun sa mga food-poor areas. And the need, ibig sabihin, hindi lang sa mga undernourished, malnourished, stunted, or wasted students, pero lahat, lalo na sa food-poor areas. And then the need to design it as an all-year-round program. So, ibig sabihin, posible pa bang merong pa ring household-based component kapag ka summer vacation, the kids are not in school, para lang siguruhin that the learners will continually achieve their target weight, restore their health and nourishment, and capacity to be ready to learn, no, pagbalik sa school year. I don't know, Mr. President, Madam Chair, posible bang i-consider ng department yung ganitong panukala, and then mag-provide po ng study kung magkano ito, how much would it cost government if it were to implement the program?
Your Honor, DepEd and Her Honor had said that we can submit this in writing, no? But I think this is important to bring to the attention of all.
Thank you.
Na DepEd mismo ang nag-provide naman sa atin, sa committee, ng iba-ibang options for the feeding program. And one of them, Your Honor, is universal feeding of K to grade 3 for wasted, severely wasted, stunted, and severely stunted in grade 4 and grade 6 for 200 feeding days, which is basically practically the entire school year, right? Pero Your Honor, ang gastos nito is 80 billion as opposed to our current budget, which is 5.7 billion. So they would like it. I asked the Secretary herself, and this is something that they support and would appreciate, but the cost is, again, it's a budgetary concern,
Opo. But
primarily.
Opo. But still, Mr. President, Madam Chair, I really appreciate na nag-propose mismo ang department sa atin ng ganitong mga options.
Yes, Your Honor.
Opo. And
Pwede natin paratingin sa mga advocates na
Opo.
aware naman ng DepEd and they crunch the numbers to look at those options.
At pwede nating balikan po, Mr. President, Madam Chair, sa mga susunod pang mga taon, the possibility of bringing in more of these other options. Innovative na nga po yung naisip nilang universal feeding na para sa lahat ng K-3. So matutuwa po yung mga advocates ng K-3 learners as priority groups in the disbursement of the vouchers program na at least dun sa nutrition side, school feeding program side, may pagtatangi, may magpagpa-prioritize sa K-3. So maganda po yung innovation na naisip na ng DepEd yung option na universal feeding sa K-3 and then targeted pa rin dun sa
Grade 4 to
grades
grade 6.
4 to 6.
oo.
So,
and 200
yes.
days po lahat yan, 200 days yan. So may iba tong, like I said, there are many options. There are options that only cover 120 days. There are quite a few options that they have considered, Your Honor, but all of which will cost more than the current budget that we have allocated.
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Pero yon, at least meron tayong ganitong idea from them and from the department at pwede posibleng balikan in the next years. And of course, na pwedeng ikabit dun sa existing na mga nutrition laws and programs natin. So yung meron na po tayong first 1,000 days law, meron pong school feeding program, tinuturo ng mga nutrition advocates yung gap dun sa preschool years after 2 years old but before kinder. So maganda pong mapuno din natin yung gap na yon over time. Just to my last 3 questions, Madam Chair, Mr. President. Earlier, before this budget plenary, there was an ongoing discussion on a ban on extracurricular activities. Some stakeholders found the ban counterproductive and that it restricts the space for holistic learning and development of the learners. Pwede po bang magkaroon ng update sa status ng proposed policy na ito at kung nag-issue na o nag-implementa ang department ng proposal in consultation sa mga stakeholders, lalo na po yung mga teachers at student groups?
Yes, Your Honor. What do I call this? It's called a policy? A department order. This is covered here? Okay. Okay. Provision number 6 under Department Order 34 Series of 2022 states, Your Honor, co-curricular and extracurricular programs may be conducted throughout the school year. And there are certain requirements. Number 1, it should be after school hours, weekend, holidays, etc. In other words, not school hours. It shall not affect instructional time of the learners. And 3, participation shall be optional and voluntary. And then there's a list of proposed activities, student government program, environmental education, and so on and so forth. There's a list of 12 activities. Would you like me to read them? I can.
Yes, salamat, Mr. President, Madam
So,
Chair.
number 1, student government program. 2, environmental education. 3, comprehensive sexuality education. 4, drug and substance abuse and other forms of addiction prevention. 5, advocacy campaigns and intervention. 6, mental health programs and psychosocial support for learners. 7, capacity building and student leadership formation programs. 8, culture and arts program. 9, scouting movement. 10, Gawad Siklab. 11, Philippine Youth Convergence. 12, DepEd nationally initiated or mandated co-curricular activities.
Maraming salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. So, it would seem that there is no ban on extracurricular activities. Tama po ba?
Well,
Even the
so-
list is just proposed activities, pero hindi yung ito lang ang pwedeng extracurricular activities.
Clearly, Your Honor, what I read now means that there are guidelines to be followed for extracurricular and co-curricular activities. And like Her Honor said, those are proposed lists, no? Yeah. It is a proposed list, no? Hindi yung binasa ko kanina. Proposed list of activities yun, right? So it's not an exclusive. It's not exclusive. We can add to it. Yeah. So examples of extracurricular activities are community service, festival celebrations, drama, computer, PE clubs, and other learning area clubs, choir, art, hobbies, sports.
Salamat, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Even the first 3 requirements that Madam Chair mentioned, if I remember correctly, that they are outside school hours, they will not eat into the school hours of the students, they are voluntary, they are optional, not mandatory. Para pong description lang talaga na kung ano ang extracurricular activity. So, can I, Mr. President, Madam Chair, reassure our youth and student partner organizations that there is no ban, that there is no closed list of extracurricular activities that will be respected and supported by the department?
Yes. Mr. President, they have never banned it, so let's be clear about that. They never used the word ban, so there is no ban. But this is just me also adding to that, Your Honor. We note that it should be conducted after school hours. I just like to, and I'm sure Her Honor would share this concern. We were talking about nutrition just before this topic on allowed or banned extracurricular. Nutrition has 2 spectrums, no? Undernourished, walang nutrition, and then obese, na nasobrahan pero baka pwedeng obese na kulang ang nutrition, na. If we do not educate our children on learning that physical education is an important component of life, especially their health, we also may be coming up, it's like, sorry to use this example, but like the one-child policy of China. We may then have a generation of obese or not inclined. Di ba ngayon pa lang there are a lot of studies that the activities of children tend to be sedentary. Di ba, nagko-computer. So pag tinanggal nyo pa yan, lalo, and that interest in sports starts at an early age. No? You may find that communities that have sports available to kids, ang dami nag-a-avail. Communities that don't have, di walang nag-a-avail kasi nga wala. So can you rethink that, no? In your, I won't pursue this, but I think it's aligned with Her Honor's concerns.
Indeed, Mr. President, Madam Chair, I believe that many life and social skills are developed through extracurricular activities, through sports, through activism, through journalism, through student governance, and many others, some of them which were included in the proposed list of the department order. Even some of us, members of the Senate, found our passions and our inspirations participating and engaging in extracurricular activities. And I hope and I continue to dedicate myself to the proposition that these spaces remain and remain respected and protected as they contribute to the holistic development of our learners.
Perhaps, Your Honor, we can ask DepEd to review that there is a designated time din, no? Kasi kung outside talaga, some of those activities may really never find a place in a child's schedule. And I know, we note, no, with concern that it's totally voluntary. But physical education, if you ask me, cannot be voluntary. Yeah. It's integrated. Okay. So again, communication, ano? A lot of these are integrated naman pala in the curriculum kasi meron din kayo dyan yung leadership and student governance. Parang kasama naman dapat talaga yun, ano? Those are our future leaders. So as long as you assure us that they're integrated, if Her Honor would like a separate discussion on this, we can get more details later on, or we can ensure, because we share the same concern, Your Honor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. After I get back to our youth and student partners, I may welcome that meeting. Of course, and I agree, Mr. President, Madam Chair, ang PE naman, bahagi talaga ng curriculum. Pero bukod doon sa extracurriculars, napakahalaga ng mga iba't ibang sports teams and clubs sa mga schools. Yung student council mismo, autonomous talaga siya. And then there are the other extracurricular activities available on campus. So, a related topic, my second to the last question, Mr. President, Madam Chair. For the record, gusto ko pong magtanong tungkol naman sa DepEd Order number 49, which according to the agency spokesperson ay naglalayo na i-further professionalize yung delivery ng basic education programs at services. Pero nakatanggap ng negative reactions mula sa teachers groups na nagsabing hihigpitan nun yung kanilang freedom of expression at yung kanilang mga karapatan. So, for the record, Mr. President, Madam Chair, pwede po bang magkaroon ng paglilinaw sa rationale ng memo na ito, or rather order na ito, at kung paano i-enforce ito ng DepEd?
Paano pa sinabi na maglalang doon? What did the DepEd itself state? Yung not communicated, yung ba yun?
Does Her Honor have a specific concern on DO 49 or just overall? Kasi medyo maraming ano to, 'di ba? Maraming nabanggit na mga
Yes, Madam
particular
Chair,
actions,
Mr. President.
so that
Opo, particularly
I can
the
get
matter
a
of
specific response.
Opo. Sa panahong ito na embedded na ang social media sa ating learning processes.
Okay.
Opo,
Yeah,
I find it bothersome for DO 49 na iniuutos yung ating mga guro na, quote, avoid relationships, interaction, and communication, including following social media with learners outside of the school setting, except if they are relatives. Sa prinsipyo po kasi, Mr. President, Madam Chair, na teachers are in loco parentis at all times. So, paglilinaw po, paano ba i-interpret dapat itong order, yung implikasyon nito for teacher-student relations and the spaces provided within the school settings para masiguro yung positive learning environment para sa mga estudyante at guro.
Thank you. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for giving us details on your concern. No? Your Honor, I also was following the news on this, and upon after conferring with DepEd, number one, ang ini-encourage naman ng DO 49 is that teachers conduct themselves in a professional manner. So, ako na lang po ito, and I will just ask the DepEd to nod if tama ang pagkaka-explain ko. As a professional, if you have any grievance, kahit naman tayo po, I've been in the private sector din, idaan mo sa tama yung grievance, no? Relay it in the proper way. Kahit ako, may mga kaibigan ako na bawat galaw na lang, pinost talaga sa Facebook. I am personally, I'm speaking for myself, Your Honor, I would recommend also that these concerns would be idaan dun sa tamang proseso. Kung ano yung gusto niyang i-post sa personal life niya, wala namang problema doon. To a certain extent, professional. Pero yung, especially grievances, tingin ko nga naman, tama naman na idaan sa tamang proseso. At the end of the day, you want to talk about it, tingin ko freedom naman talaga nila yon. We both agree on that. You want to talk about it, yes. But you want it to be dealt with professionally, deal with it professionally. Don't expect your bosses or superiors to respond to your social media post, di ba? Yun lang naman ang sa akin. I'm not referring to any particular case. Tama ba? Okay. Of course, it's case-to-case basis naman po. As with respect to teachers refraining from contacting or interacting with their students outside of the school setting, I think there has been clarifications on this as well. Again, they just wanted this to be professionalized, and siguro may mga sitwasyon that did not end well with this parang naging personal na masyado. But there is in no way any desire to limit the efforts of very well-meaning teachers na napakarami na nagkukusang tumulong sa estudyante na nangangailangan ng extra help. Wala naman hong problema doon, and in fact, I believe that you recognize the efforts of those teachers. Ano? So I hope that addresses the concerns of Her Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. President. I'll get back to our teacher partner organizations as well na ito, kaya nga sila nag-organisa at kumikilos because they are promoting professionalism in the conduct
tama ho yan.
of their profession.
And if we can assist in meetings, we of course we will do that, no? Our common offices, Your Honor.
Opo, salamat Mr. President, Madam Chair. And of course, salamat sa affirmation ng ni Madam Chair, Mr. President, dun sa freedom of expression din ng mga teachers and teachers organizations. For sure, yung mga partners namin, alam ko po na they engage directly and through the correct processes, whether with their administration or owners of their schools kung sa private sector, and sa DepEd kapag may mga issue na kailangan nilang i-problematize o kailangan nilang
And if I may just add,
Yes,
no,
Mr. President.
siguro we will bring to the attention of DepEd na minsan dumadating sa ganon kasi they do not feel that they are heard. So be sure lang na yung channels nyo ay bukas, di ba? Kung siguro may sitwasyon na dami nating naririnig na ganyan na parang between the teacher and the principal hindi na lang mapaparating yung problem nila. So be sure lang Madam VP and the team no na yung channels nyo are open, di ba? Which I know naman that is the objective here.
Salamat, Madam Chair, Mr.
Okay,
President.
so we got the assurance on that, Your Honor.
Opo.
You can tell the partner groups that you work with.
I will do that, Mr. President, Madam Chair, and thank the DepEd for that. But also in addition to that, minsan yung communications nila through media, including social media, ay bahagi na rin ang pag-organize nila, pag-educate sa sarili nilang mga miyembro, pag-mobilize, especially for their issue-based campaigns and advocacies. Kaya sila concerned din dito sa Department Order 49. And certainly, no, yung pag-preserve ng professional relationship with their students, yung pinakamatinding opposite example niyan ay yung inimbestiga din natin dito, Mr. President, Madam Chair, sa Senado na mga sexual harassment
Yes.
against students.
Yes.
And at the same time, the greater number of teachers and administrators have in fact been supporting students
Of
kahit
course.
laban sa ganyang sexual harassment and violence, pati sa sulong ng mga estudyante ng kanilang mental health. Sometimes, if the students cannot ask for or get the help that they need, minsan social media na lang yung huling space where they feel somebody might hear them. And again, there are many cases where it is their individual teachers or mentors na keep in touch with them, provide a lifeline also in social media. But thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. President, for that. Definitely ko communicate ko po sa partner teacher organizations namin. And so to my last question, Madam Chair, recently, a news article citing the World Health Organization reported, ito kaugnay ng isang pinag-uusapan natin kanina, Mr. President, reported the youth's lack of physical activities and lack of ambitions, lalo na daw those aged 11 to 17. And I believe, Madam Chair, Mr. President, it's also one of the subjects of the resolutions filed by our Finance Committee Chair, Chair Angara. One of the aspirations that DepEd is working on is to enable learners to realize their aspirations that represent their ideals and ambitions. So nag-wonder po ako, Madam Chair, Mr. President, kung paano yung current DepEd leadership ay nag-i-intend na magawa ang task na ito. So pag-engganyo sa mga young people natin na mangarap at pag-engganyo sa kanila na mag-maintain ng mas active lifestyle. Para nga hindi maging obese, para maging sporty, isama ang sports sa kanilang active lifestyle. At ano yung mga budget items na pinapayagan na makapag-ambag sa task na ito?
Actually, Mr. President, katulad ng sinabi nyo, no, that is a WHO finding and worldwide ang problem na yan. Yan din yata yung age na naiengganyo din talaga yung mga bata sa mga sa mga computer games and all that. Sabi ko nga, I can relate kasi yung anak ko is 12 years old. Kung pwedeng matulog na lang siya buong araw, that would be his ideal day. But on that note, ano ang intervention? Meron silang Galaw Pilipinas na programa na hinihikayat nga ang kabataan, hindi lang kabataan, lahat, pati dapat teachers. Katulad ng binanggit ko, kwento ko na rin sa DepEd family na nung pumunta ako ng conference sa Seoul, yung break namin is not called a food break, it's a mobility break. So nag-play sila ng mga Koreans na nagke-K-pop dance doon. Lahat ng members, pati ako na hindi marunong sumayaw, makikisayaw ka. Yung make it exciting for the youth to engage in these things. And then, Your Honor, ako na nagvo-volunteer nito. I think malaking tulong din na nakita nila yung ating mga Olympians and other world-recognized athletes, di ba? Kasi naiengganyo din sila lalo. So, I think the partnerships with LGUs are very important kasi hindi naman kakayanin lang ng DepEd yon. But may I take this opportunity to ask DepEd to strengthen include nila dun sa discussions nila with every LGU. Yung ano yung mga sports na pwedeng ma-offer, sports and other physical activities.
And sorry.
Yes, the Palarong Pambansa, Your Honor, will be resuming and napakaganda yung programa niyan. I am a Palarong Pambansa, ano ba tawag doon, graduate. At pati si Senate 1992 champion. Ako 80s. Ako 80s. So, did we respond to her Honor's questions?
Yes, Mr. President, Madam
Yes.
Chair. Salamat. I presume Galaw Pilipinas has a line item budget sa ating
May line item.
para sa year 2023.
Under MOOE, Mr. President.
So under MOE. Okay, that is good to know, Mr. President, Madam Chair. And I support together with the good chair programs like the Palarong Pambansa, especially as it can be built on community-based
Yes.
and school-based sports development program among our youth. So those are all my questions, Mr. President, Madam Chair. Maraming salamat po sa inyo at sa DepEd family. I just end by reiterating that what to do with the DepEd Confidential Fund remains a question. And so at the proper time, because it was expressed by the DepEd leadership na iiwan nila sa Kongreso yung propriety at yung halaga ng fund na ito, that I hope my colleagues in the Senate will share the view that there are no extraordinarily compelling reasons to provide a confidential fund to the education agency at mas magagamit natin itong confidential funds sa mas mahahalagang mga prioridad para sa mga batang mag-aaral na marami ay pinag-usapan natin sa ating interpellation. So at the proper time, I will make the proper proposed proposed amendment on the realignment.
Mr.
If
President,
I
may
still
I
have the
move
floor,
for...
Mr. President, I just would like to thank everyone.
Your Honor. Thank you.
Salamat po.
Madam, for health reasons, Madam, Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Yes, that's suspended for 1 minute. We will,
Sorry po, ma'am.
It's okay.
Opo, ay... Pero pagkatapos naman daw. Opo, after naman daw po ng intervention natin with the DepEd.